This is happening right now in Jerusalem. The ancient stones of the old city shimmered under the morning sun as if alive with anticipation. Something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount, and the entire city stopped to witness it. Thousands abandoned their morning routines, their shops, their prayers at the Western Wall, all to gaze upward at what could not be explained. The streets went silent. The usual cacophony of market vendors, tour guides, and pilgrims faded to nothing as every soul in the holy city held their breath. Even reporters had no words when they arrived at the scene, their cameras capturing only fragments of what was unfolding. And when I tell you why, you'll understand what's truly happening before our eyes. It began 3 days ago. At dawn, Rabbi Eliezer ben David, a 78-year-old keeper of ancient traditions, climbed the stairs to his rooftop overlooking the Western Wall Plaza, as he had done every morning for 40 years. In his weathered hands, he carried a shofar, a ram's horn polished to a warm amber glow, passed down through 7 generations of his family. The mainstream media isn't covering this. They've dismissed it as mass hysteria or religious fervor. But the truth cannot remain hidden forever. Rabbi Eliezer lifted the shofar to his lips as the first rays of sunlight touched the golden dome of the rock. For decades, his morning tekiah, the long, unbroken blast of the shofar, had been part of Jerusalem's heartbeat. Some mornings, a few tourists might pause to listen. Other days, only the birds and ancient stones would bear witness. But on this day, as the tekiah began to resonate across the old city, something extraordinary happened. The sound grew stronger, fuller, as if dozens, hundreds of shofars had joined in perfect harmony. Rabbi Eliezer felt it before he heard it, a vibration through the stone beneath his feet, a resonance that seemed to come from the earth itself. "I have blown the shofar every morning for 40 years, he would later tell those who gathered around him. But this time, the shofar was blowing through me. The sound rose and swelled, echoing not just through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, but seemingly beyond, a call that transcended distance. As Rabbi Eliezer held the final note, tears streaming down his face, the impossible happened. The sound stopped. Not in the natural way a shofar call fades, but suddenly, completely, as if snatched from the air itself. And in that perfect silence, people throughout Jerusalem reported seeing the same vision, a shimmering light above the Temple Mount, neither lightning nor sunlight, but something altogether different, a light that seemed to breathe. Within hours, thousands had gathered in the old city, Jews from every quarter of Jerusalem, Muslims emerging from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Christians pausing their pilgrimages along the Via Dolorosa, all drawn by an inexplicable sense that something ancient and powerful had awakened. An American tourist from Texas fell to her knees. "I've never heard the shofar before today," she whispered to those around her, but something in my soul recognized it immediately. It was calling me. By nightfall, the first videos appeared online. The sound of the shofar, impossibly loud and clear, followed by that unnatural silence. In the background of each recording, no matter the angle or distance, the same strange light could be seen hovering over the Temple Mount. Scientists offered theories: unusual atmospheric conditions, mass auditory hallucination. Religious leaders were more cautious, speaking of signs and portents with measured words. But those who stood in Jerusalem that morning knew this wasn't hysteria, this wasn't a trick of light or sound, this was prophecy in motion. The next morning, Rabbi Eliezer again climbed to his rooftop with his shofar. This time, hundreds gathered below, phones ready to record. As he raised the ram's horn to his lips, a hush fell over the crowd. The sound that emerged was unlike anything heard before, not just the call of the shofar, but something deeper, as if the very stones of Jerusalem were crying out in response. The sound rolled across the city like a wave, touching every ear, vibrating through every heart. And again, at the height of the Tikaya, the sound vanished. The silence that followed was profound, expectant, as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting. The light appeared once more above the Temple Mount, brighter now, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. That was yesterday. Today marks the third day, and Jerusalem has become the center of the world's attention. Pilgrims from every nation are streaming into the city. Hotels are full. The streets are packed with those waiting, watching. What they're waiting for, no one can say with certainty. But there's a word on every lip, whispered in awe and anticipation: Maranatha. Come, Lord. Today, something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount. As the morning sun bathed Jerusalem in gold, people from every nation under heaven stood shoulder to shoulder in the ancient streets. The scene resembled a human tapestry, Ethiopians in white shawls next to Orthodox Jews in black coats, American tourists beside Arab merchants, Chinese pilgrims alongside Brazilian evangelicals. All eyes fixed on the Temple Mount, all hearts beating in unexpected unison. Even reporters had no words for the phenomenon sweeping through the holy city. The major networks sent their correspondents, but their cameras captured only fragments of the spiritual awakening unfolding before them. The mainstream media isn't covering the full story. They reduce it to curious headlines about mass gatherings and religious enthusiasm. But those standing in Jerusalem's streets know they're witnessing something far beyond ordinary explanation. David Cohen, a secular Israeli who hadn't set foot in a synagogue since childhood, found himself drawn to the Western Wall at dawn, though he couldn't explain why. "Something pulled me here," he told those gathered around him. "I woke before sunrise with a single thought. I need to be at the wall when the shofar sounds." He wasn't alone. By sunrise, tens of thousands had assembled throughout the old city. People who spoke different languages found themselves communicating through nods, smiles, and the shared sense of expectation. Then Rabbi Eliezer appeared on his rooftop, shofar in hand. The crowd fell silent. Children stopped playing. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the birds seemed to pause their morning songs. As the elderly rabbi lifted the ram's horn to his lips, a collective intake of breath swept through the multitude. The sound that emerged transcended the physical limitations of a single horn blown by aging lungs. It rolled across Jerusalem like thunder, yet clear as crystal, a sound that seemed to vibrate not just through the air, but through time itself. Then, as it had for 2 days prior, the sound stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, the light above the Temple Mount intensified, no longer just shimmering, but pulsating with purpose. And something new happened. From every direction, north, south, east, and west, answering shofar blasts echoed across Jerusalem. No one could see who was blowing them or from where they originated. Yet the sounds converged over the Temple Mount, weaving together in harmonies impossible for human musicians to create. Dr. Sarah Abramson, professor of ancient Near Eastern studies at Hebrew University, dropped her phone as she attempted to record the phenomenon. "This is exactly as described in ancient texts," she whispered to her colleague. "The prophet Zechariah wrote about this, the day when God would sound the trumpet himself." A group of tourists from Japan stood transfixed. "We came as curious visitors," one explained later, "but now we feel like participants in something profound." As morning gave way to afternoon, something remarkable occurred throughout Jerusalem. People began sharing food and water with strangers, regardless of religious or ethnic differences. Muslims invited Christians into areas usually restricted to them. Orthodox Jews embraced secular visitors. An elderly Palestinian woman shared her homemade bread with an Israeli soldier who had been stationed at a checkpoint she passed through daily. "Today," she said simply, "we are all children of Jerusalem." By evening, the crowds had not dispersed, but grown. Flights arriving at Ben Gurion Airport were packed with people who had dropped everything to come to Jerusalem. Many couldn't explain the urgency that drove them, only that they felt compelled to be present. Satellite images showed highways leading to Jerusalem clogged with vehicles. Social media erupted with hundreds of thousands of posts tagged Jerusalem calling. This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion. What the ancient prophets foresaw is unfolding before our eyes. Isaiah wrote of a time when all nations will stream to the mountain of the Lord's house. Zechariah spoke of the day when 10 people from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the edge of his robe and say, "Let us go with you, because we have heard that God is with you." My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing what generations only dreamed of seeing? As night fell over Jerusalem, something unexpected happened at the Western Wall. People began placing written prayers between the ancient stones, a tradition centuries old. But tonight, those of every faith joined in the practice. Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and Buddhists stood alongside Jews, adding their written hopes to the wall's embracing crevices. A rabbi in his 90s wept openly as he watched. "In all my years, I never thought I would see the nations come together like this in Jerusalem," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "This is the beginning of something our ancestors prayed for." As midnight approached on this second day of wonders, the light above the Temple Mount remained, a beacon calling to the world. Tomorrow would be the third day, and in Jerusalem, everyone understood the significance of the third day. The streets went silent this morning for a reason no one can explain. Jerusalem has always been a city of sounds, prayers, arguments, commerce, and the constant flow of pilgrims. But today, as the sun crested the Mount of Olives, an extraordinary stillness descended. A peace beyond understanding blanketed the holy city. Even reporters had no words to describe what they were witnessing. One BBC correspondent, live on air, simply stopped mid-sentence and wept. They don't want you to see what's really happening in Jerusalem right now. Social media platforms have begun flagging videos of the events as unverified or a potential misinformation. But the truth can't stay hidden forever. By dawn, over 100,000 people had gathered throughout Jerusalem, with the largest concentration surrounding the Temple Mount. The diversity was astounding. People from every continent, every major religion, every walk of life. Scientists stood next to shamans, atheists alongside imams, children perched on their parents' shoulders for a better view. An African pilgrim from Ghana clutched his Bible. "I sold everything I owned for a plane ticket," he explained to those around him. "I didn't know why until this moment." A group of Orthodox Jewish men stood side by side with Palestinian families. Their decades of tension dissolved in the presence of something greater. "The walls between us fell before we even realized they were unnecessary," an elderly Palestinian man observed. Then, as the morning light strengthened, Rabbi Eliezer appeared once more. For 3 days, his shofar had called out to Jerusalem and beyond. For 3 days, the mysterious light had hovered over the Temple Mount. For 3 days, people had streamed into the holy city from the ends of the earth. But everyone sensed that today would be different. Today was the third day. The elderly rabbi lifted his shofar with trembling hands. The crowd held its collective breath, and as the ram's horn touched his lips, something unprecedented occurred. Before he could blow, thousands of shofars sounded simultaneously throughout Jerusalem, from the Mount of Olives, from rooftops, from the hands of those who had brought their own ram's horns. The sound was overwhelming, majestic, both ancient and somehow new. Unlike previous days, the sound didn't stop suddenly. Instead, it began to transform, shifting into what many later described as music beyond music, or the harmony of creation itself. The notes seemed to form words without language, conveying meaning directly to the heart. And as this celestial music reached its crescendo, the light above the Temple Mount expanded. What had been a shimmering presence now became a column of light connecting heaven and earth. People fell to their knees, not in fear, but in awe. Some covered their faces, others reached upward with open hands. Many wept without shame or restraint. This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion. The prophets of old wrote of this day, "In that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. It shall be in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour on the house of David, and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and supplication." The most extraordinary aspect wasn't what people saw or heard, it was what they felt. Witnesses described a profound sense of being known completely, yet loved unconditionally. Ancient hatreds dissolved like mist in morning sun. Grievances carried for generations were simply set down and walked away from. A Jewish Holocaust survivor embraced a German tourist whose grandfather had served in the SS. "I forgive," she said simply, "and I am forgiven." An Israeli mother whose son had died in a bombing sat with a Palestinian father whose child had been killed at a checkpoint. No words were necessary as they held each other's hands. "My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing the healing of wounds thousands of years old?" By midday, the phenomenon had spread beyond Jerusalem. Reports came in from around the world of similar lights appearing over cities and villages. The shofar sound was heard in places where no one was blowing a physical horn, from the Amazon rainforest to the Australian outback, from Siberian tundra to African savannas. Dr. Rachel Weinstein, an atmospheric physicist who had come to Jerusalem as a skeptic, stood with her scientific instruments forgotten in her hands. "Oh, there is no natural explanation for what we're witnessing," she admitted. "This defies every physical law we know." As afternoon approached, those gathered noticed something new forming within the column of light above the Temple Mount. A shape, indistinct at first, then increasingly clear. A throne, and upon it, a presence that no one could look at directly, yet everyone recognized immediately in the depths of their being. The veil between heaven and earth was growing thinner. This was the preview of the greatest event in human history. As the sun began its descent toward the Mediterranean, the atmosphere in Jerusalem shifted from awe to anticipation. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The third day was not yet over. This is happening right now in Jerusalem. As twilight descended upon the holy city, the gathering of nations reached proportions never before witnessed in human history. Satellite images confirmed what those on the ground could feel. Over 1 million people now stood throughout Jerusalem, with the epicenter at the Temple Mount. The streets went silent as darkness fell, not from fear, but from holy anticipation. The usual evening sounds of the city, calls to prayer, church bells, the Shabbat songs, all paused in deference to something greater unfolding. The mainstream media has begun acknowledging that something unprecedented is occurring, though they struggle to categorize it. Mass spiritual experience, some call it. Collective religious phenomenon, say others. But those present know that clinical terms cannot capture the reality of what is happening. The light above the Temple Mount no longer resembled anything natural. What had begun as a shimmering presence, then became a column, had now transformed into what witnesses could only describe as an opening in reality itself, a doorway between dimensions. An elderly nun from Ethiopia, who had journeyed alone despite her failing health, stood with tears streaming down her face. "I have waited my entire life for this moment," she whispered to those around her. This is what the ancient church fathers wrote about in texts too sacred to be widely shared. A Jewish physicist who had dedicated his career to string theory and multiple dimensions stared upward, his academic skepticism dissolved by what his eyes beheld. The mathematics always suggested this was possible, he murmured, that what we perceive as reality is merely a shadow of something far more substantial. This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion, what Ezekiel saw in his vision of the heavenly throne, what John described in Revelation, what Daniel glimpsed when he fell on his face before the Ancient of Days. These weren't metaphors or dreams. They were glimpses through a veil that was now being drawn back before a worldwide audience. As midnight approached, Rabbi Eliezer appeared one final time. For 3 days, his shofar had called out to Jerusalem and beyond. But tonight, he carried no ram's horn. Instead, the 78-year-old keeper of traditions walked with empty hands to the center of the Western Wall Plaza. The crowd parted silently to make way. Muslims stepped aside reverently. Christians bowed their heads. Jews whispered blessings as he passed. Upon reaching the center, Rabbi Eliezer did something unexpected. He knelt down and placed his forehead against the ancient stones. Then, in a voice that somehow carried to every ear despite its softness, he spoke a single word, Hineni, here I am. The response came not as words but as light, pure, living light that flowed from the opening above the Temple Mount. It cascaded down like a waterfall of radiance, illuminating the old city in colors beyond the natural spectrum. People didn't shield their eyes. Though brighter than the sun, the light didn't hurt to behold. Instead, it seemed to heal everything it touched. Those who had come with illnesses found themselves suddenly whole. Those burdened by grief felt their sorrows lifted. Those who had lived with hatred discovered it impossible to maintain in the presence of such love. A Muslim imam fell to his knees beside an Orthodox rabbi, both men overcome. "We have been worshipping the same God all along," the imam said through tears. "How could we not have seen it?" A group of scientists who had come to document the phenomenon with instruments and cameras set aside their equipment. "Some things must simply be experienced," one explained. "Analysis would only diminish this. My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? This is the moment creation has been holding its breath for since the foundation of the world." As midnight struck, something changed in the atmosphere. The opening above the Temple Mount widened further, and through it came a sound, not of shofars this time, but of something even more ancient. Those present described it variously as the music that stars were made to, the song that light sings, or simply the voice of love itself. And within this celestial symphony, words became distinguishable, not in Hebrew or Arabic or English or any human tongue, yet somehow understood by each person in their native language. "Behold, I am making all things new." The effect was immediate and profound. Throughout Jerusalem and reportedly around the world as the phenomenon spread, enemies embraced, soldiers laid down weapons. Those who had nursed grievances for lifetimes found themselves unable to remember why. A Palestinian shopkeeper who had lost his son in the conflicts shared his water with an Israeli soldier. "We are brothers," he said simply. "How could I have forgotten?" The veil between heaven and earth wasn't just thinning. It was being removed entirely. As the third day approached its final hours, those gathered in Jerusalem understood they were witnessing not just history, but the beginning of a new reality altogether. The ancient prophecies weren't just being fulfilled, they were being transcended. And then, as the first hint of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, the opening above the Temple Mount began to pulse with anticipation. Something, or someone, was about to emerge. Creation held its breath. The fourth day was about to begin. Today, something impossible appeared over the Temple Mount. As the first rays of sunlight touched Jerusalem on the fourth morning, the opening above the sacred hill widened to its fullest extent. The light that had been building for 3 days now reached an intensity that transformed the entire city into a landscape of living radiance. Even reporters had no words. Global broadcasts showed journalists standing in speechless awe, cameras pointed upward, tears streaming down their faces. You're watching this because God wanted you to see it. Something in your spirit recognizes this moment as different from anything that has come before. The ancient stones of the old city shimmered beneath the supernatural light, not merely reflecting it, but seeming to awaken to their original purpose. The same soil where prophets walked, the same streets that heard the Messiah's footsteps, now trembled with recognition. Then, at precisely sunrise, it happened. The sound of the shofar stopped suddenly, not just in Jerusalem, but worldwide. Every horn being blown, every speaker playing recordings, every natural echo fell instantly silent. In that profound stillness, even the heartbeats of those gathered seemed to pause. And then he appeared. Not as most had expected, not with armies of angels or cosmic pyrotechnics. Instead, a single figure stood where the light was brightest above the Temple Mount. Simple in appearance, yet impossible to fully comprehend with human perception, both utterly familiar and completely beyond description. Those who witnessed it would later struggle to explain what they saw. He was a man, yet more than a man, many would say, both humble and magnificent beyond words. What happened next defied the normal flow of time. Although it seemed to last both an instant and an eternity, witnesses described several distinct moments. First came recognition. Throughout the vast crowd, people from every faith tradition, every culture, every language experienced the same realization simultaneously. Some fell to their knees, others stood with arms outstretched. Many simply wept. An atheist professor of comparative religion who had come to document the mass delusion found himself prostrate on the ground. I knew him, he would later write, not from texts or teachings, but from the deepest part of myself that I had spent a lifetime denying. A Buddhist monk from Thailand raised his hands in surrender. "This is what we have been seeking through meditation for centuries," he said to those around him. The ultimate reality behind all appearance. This isn't hysteria, this is prophecy in motion. What the prophets saw thousands of years ago is unfolding before our eyes. Isaiah wrote, "Every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess." Zechariah foresaw, "The Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name." The second moment was communication, though not through audible words. Each person present described receiving understanding directly into their consciousness, not as information or concepts, but as living truth that transformed even as it was grasped. "I understood everything," explained a quantum physicist who had been skeptical until that moment. Not just science or the universe, but the purpose behind it all, the why, not just the how. A lifelong religious scholar set aside his texts. "All my study was like looking at shadows on a cave wall," he admitted. "Now I've turned to see the light casting those shadows." My friend, can you feel this in your spirit? Do you realize we are witnessing not just the fulfillment of prophecy, but its transcendence? The third moment was invitation. Those present felt drawn toward the figure of light, not coerced or commanded, but invited with a love so compelling that resistance seemed unthinkable. People began moving as one toward the Temple Mount from every direction, not pushing or shoving despite their numbers, but flowing together in perfect harmony. Jews, Muslims, Christians, and those of every other faith or no faith at all distinctions seemed meaningless now in the presence of the original unity from which all things emerged. A rabbi in his 90s who needed a cane to walk found himself moving effortlessly forward. "And this is what my ancestors meant by the world to come," he exclaimed. "Not a place, but a person. Not a time, but a presence." An imam who had once preached against other religions embraced those around him. We were arguing about different glimpses of the same light. He realized aloud. How small our understanding has been. The final moment was transformation. As the gathered multitude approached the figure of light, something changed. not just in the atmosphere, but in the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Those present described a sensation of becoming more real, more solid, more alive than they had ever been, as if what they had previously considered existence was merely a preliminary sketch of what life was meant to be. "I realized that I had never truly been alive until this moment," explained a young woman who had come as a curious tourist. "Everything before was just preparation. The veil between heaven and earth wasn't just thin, it was dissolving altogether." As this fourth day progressed, reports came in from around the world of similar manifestations appearing globally. The event that began in Jerusalem was spreading, not through media or message, but through reality itself. What happened today in Jerusalem stopped a city, but what's coming will stop the entire world. This is only the beginning. The ancient prophecies spoke of a time when the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. We are witnessing the first drops of that ocean. My friend, now that you know this, what will you do? While the world either sleeps or stares in wonder, God is calling those who recognize this moment for what it truly is. The greatest story ever told is reaching its climax, and we are invited not merely as spectators, but as participants. Are you ready for what comes next? Until then, stay ready, stay faithful. Maranatha.